Well, hello, avid readers of Christian fiction. I am so glad that you are joining us today. And I am here with Emily Hayse, and we're going to be talking about her book, Seventh City, which, if you see this was a Realm Makers Award winner. But, Emily, why don't we just start by you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I am Emily Hayse, obviously, with the name. That's a good question.
You
uh,
write books?
I write books. That's an easy one. I really enjoy horses. I used to do some training, and I worked on farms for quite a few years. I also worked with cattle, which I
Mhm.
loved. I enjoy movies and playing with my younger siblings, and I play in a local orchestra, a local
Oh,
symphony.
wow. Okay, so what do you play?
I play viola.
Oh,
I am the
wow.
principal violist.
That is
So,
awesome. And you
yeah,
live in the northern part of our wonderful country.
I do. I am from Michigan.
Awesome. And I'm from the south, and we were talking before this, and I'm like, it might snow again, and everyone is really scared right now. So but okay, tell us a little bit about Seventh City.
So, Seventh City is an Arctic fantasy. It's got very Alaskan sort of vibes. I grew up with a lot of Alaskan stories and videos. My aunt lived there for quite a few years. And so, the native words are very familiar to me, things like ulus and mukluks.
Mm,
And when I started this story, um, it was just kind of a going back to my childhood sort of a journey. And it's about the Lost City of Gold legends, particularly El Dorado, it was inspired by. And it's about a 13-year-old girl whose brother is kidnapped by invaders who have invaded their country. And he sells his life by saying, I know where the Lost City of Gold is and I'll take you to it. And she knows it's just a legend to them. And so she disguises as a horse boy. She goes along. She thinks somehow she can get her brother away, and save him before they arrive. And they know that there's no City of Gold,
yeah.
basically.
And I love the whole City of Gold idea. And right from the beginning, the main character is young. Like it's told from the point of view. And I love books that are told from like the younger perspective because like the reader knows that there's more going on, but the
Mm-hmm.
character's like trying to figure it out. So why did you just decide to write it from that point of view?
It was. I felt like it was very important. Maki is very similar to myself at that age, at 13. And then the prologue, she's about 5. And the sort of journey she had to go in internally of learning to let go of control, of courage, all these different things, facing her fears, was something I went through at 13,
Mm.
and sparked by stuff that happened when I was actually more like 2 or
Mm.
3, when those sort of childhood things happened that made me the way I was. So I thought that it was because she's in her formative years, because she's young enough to pass herself off realistically as a boy. There was just a lot of things that made it a good age choice, as well as what you brought up, that there is things going on that she doesn't realize. So you get this really unique perspective. It's in first person present tense. So you're really in her head, but there are a lot of things that are kind of going over her head as well.
Right, exactly. So you can see some of the conversations, some of the things that the other characters are saying and doing, and she's not really understanding. But I love that because then the reader is understanding. The reader is
Mm-hmm.
following along, and so it just keeps you like turning the pages because you're like, okay, something's happening. I want to know what's happening, but then she's so innocent, you almost want to protect her from knowing what's going on. So I love
Mm-hmm.
that. I love that you were able to do that, which I think is such a complex way to write. And I was like super impressed. I'm like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I can see why this is an award winner because you have the complexity of her simple point of view
Mm-hmm.
mixed with more that's going on in the story. So I think you did an excellent job at that.
Thank you. And yeah, because first person present tense can be very on the nose as well. I liked that it gave me a degree of like subtlety and removedness from what was actually going on, because you weren't getting her exact,
Uh-huh.
her exact reactions, or they were a little bit different from what the audience is seeing. So you get that little bit of barrier and
Yeah.
subtlety that
So
you wouldn't get
is that why
otherwise.
you decided to write it? Because again, that is like a hard. That's a hard. I've never written in first person present tense. That is a hard tense and a hard way to write a book. So that again, I'm super impressed that you were able to choose that and do it well. Because I think some
Mm-hmm.
people have attempted that before and they haven't done it well. So, like, what made you decide, like, okay, this is going to be a challenge and I'm going to do it?
I think most projects come to me in their tense, and I can
Mm.
just feel that it's right. And I sort of almost like reverse figured these things out,
Yeah.
the ability for it to be subtle, and for things to be going over her head and all that sort of thing. It was kind of retrospect,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it came in that tense.
That's so cool.
And
So do you read a lot? Is that why you're able? I don't know. I'm just picturing like for you to like go, okay, this is coming to me in this tense. You must be a big reader to be able to know those things or intuitively do those things, even though if you don't consciously know what you're doing.
I think so.
Yeah.
I know I grew up with really good books. My mom, in particular, was very careful of what she allowed us to read, even just quality wise.
Mm-hmm.
We wrote a ton of Newbery and Caldecott winners, a lot of really classic stuff from even like not super modern times, like maybe the 70s or 80s on back. She would go through and really like say, oh, is this edifying? Is it well written? All these different things. And that's what we grew up reading. And
That
then,
yeah makes a huge difference.
yeah. And then it just sticks. Yeah. I know some people who read like 200 books a year. That's not me. But I'll read like between 40 and 70 a year.
Yeah, well, that's a good number too. Yeah. So
It's what I
tell
can handle.
yeah, exactly. So tell me like how you got started on your journey as a writer.
So I feel like it's kind of long and twisty. I started sort of just telling myself stories when I was 2 or 3. Just making it up in my imagination. And I hit about 6 or 7, and I started telling stories out loud to my siblings.
Mm.
And I did that very consistently till I was probably between 11 and 13. And then
Are
I
you the
started writing
oldest?
them down. Second oldest.
Oh, second oldest. Yeah.
So pretty close to the top.
Yeah.
Um, and then about 11 or 13, I started jotting down stories. And I think I was 13 or 14 when I finished my first novel. And then
Wow.
I liked it so well, I just started finishing more
Uh-huh.
and more and more. And and I probably had 6 or 7 novels under my belt before I even considered publishing. It was just something I really liked doing. And the rise of independent publishing was coming. It
Mm-hmm.
was getting published as a writer was becoming more feasible and more talked about.
Right.
So I had some friends who were like, "Hey, you should look into it. You should do." And I got into the writing community. I made friends, made connections, started looking at traditional and indie and all that. And I'm trying to think. I was probably 3 years in the community before I published my first
Okay.
book.
So, and this was your
So,
first one that you published? Oh, second one.
second.
Okay. So tell us about the first one
I
too, because I want to hear about that.
Okay. So my debut novel was a portal fantasy called Crowning Heaven, and it's about a girl who grew up in the foster system, and she's about 20 or so when she is it 20? I'm gonna forget.
You're
I
okay.
forget the details of my
We'll
own books
believe you.
sometimes.
I know it's so funny when you write a lot of books. Someone will say something about a character. I'm like, okay, what book was that in? I have to think about it for a second.
Yes. Um, so she realizes that she is actually the heir to 2 enemy kingdoms, and this is portal fantasy, so it's in another world dimension sort of thing. But basically, her parents had fallen in love, sort of Romeo and Juliet style, and had
Mm.
her. And so her mother was from an enemy kingdom, and her father was from this other kingdom who wants her back as queen. And so she's heir to these 2 like completely opposed kingdoms that hate each other. And the one wants to bring her back and crown her, and the other wants to kill her.
Wow, that sounds
Yeah.
exciting. It sounds I have like one daughter, who that would be a perfect gift for her. So I need to write that down before I forget, because she would love that type of book. That sounds awesome. What was the title of that again?
Crowning Heaven.
Okay, yeah, Crowning Heaven. Okay, so what was it like to go from having like telling stories and then writing your stories down, and then finally deciding like I'm going to write a story? What was that like to actually like finally hold your book in your hand?
It was pretty exciting. I feel like I almost had desensitized myself to the excitement of it by the
Yeah.
time it happened. Um, but it was really neat. And sometimes I do take a double take, to have my books on the shelf at the library, or even have, because I've got author stock in my house. Extra copies float around. The little
Yeah.
siblings are like, "Oh, I need a copy," and they'll find another one. So I have like 5 Seventh Cities and 3 Crowning Heavens and all these other things, and I'll look on the bookshelf and be like, "Whoa, I wrote that. It was in
Yeah.
my brain once, and now it's on the shelf."
It's there and people are reading it and people are enjoying the stories, and then it's winning awards. So I would love to hear about when you found out first that it was nominated for the Realm Makers Award, and then when you won. I mean, were you just like totally blown out of the water?
I was excited when it was nominated. I was up against a few friends.
Oh, that's
So
hard.
it is. And I mean, it was exciting because on the one hand, it was really nice to know that if I didn't win, and
Mm.
I'd hoped to win fantasy category. Winning book of the year was completely off the table for me.
Yeah, because this for those that don't know, so Realm Makers has different categories. So they have like fantasy and science fiction, and you probably know some of the categories better than I do. But then at the end, they take the winners of each of the categories, and they have a complete different sets of judges that votes on the book of the year. So this is like you won your category, then you won the book of the year category.
Yes.
Yeah. And how old were you at the time? I just have to ask when you won.
26.
That is so cool. Yeah.
Yes. So it was very exciting. So I knew that friends were going to win it if I wasn't going to, but it was sort of like my next step. Like, oh, I got nominated. I would love to win it, and and book of the year will be somewhere in 5 years, whatever. But it was virtual. So the funny thing is I won my first category, and I said, oh, I'm going to have to stay online, and we had bad like rural internet at the time. And so I told the family all went inside to eat dinner, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to stay out here because it's book of the year. I have to just be online. I figured Nadine Brandy's was gonna win it because she was up that year.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm just gonna hang out here. I'm gonna watch, and I'll come in and eat in a few minutes. And then they invited me on before they had said anything about the book. So I got an invite, and I'm like, oh no, internet. And I'm like, maybe they've invited me as a mistake. And so I'm like, I don't even have my face on there. Like, I've got the sky. I'm outside.
Trying to get like the internet reception. Yeah.
Yes. And then they announce it, and I'm like, what even just happened? This wasn't a mistake. And so I remember spitting out some kind of, acceptance speech because I'd already said my other one for fantasy and hadn't even thought of something for book of the year. So, but it was exciting. I had just actually, my great grandmother was really supportive of my writing, and she had just passed the day before.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And this book, particularly Seventh City, was very tied and connected to loss and dealing with that, and dealing with the kind of emotions and feeling of wanting to control and trying to be brave and move on when you're afraid of loss. And so even just having it up for an award at that time was very comforting to me. But then to have it be book of the year right after I lost her was just a very sweet
That
gift.
So cool. Oh, you're making me tear up. And when I start crying on here, it's over. So we just got to keep going. So Seventh City won. Now, when this was up for nomination, did you already have other books in the process that you were working on or getting published?
I did. In fact, I had a book already out. The Last Atlantean was the next standalone I did, which was a Atlantis retelling set in coastal Maine, 1912. That had come out in April. So it was like came out right after the nomination, and it had been out for a few months by the time the book had come out. And yeah, and I had friends. I was talking about like, how do you move on if you've won something? You don't want your expectations too high. You know, how do you move on without, you know, scaring yourself? Like, will I ever do anything again?
Right.
Sort of a feeling. And she was saying it's really healthy to just move on with your project. So
Right.
having another project already out there, and then I was working on another one for publication after that, was really helpful.
Yeah, and your book sounds so interesting. The Atlantis retelling sounds awesome. Another one that I'm gonna have to look up. And then you said that this one has so was it short stories that you have that go along with it? So tell
Yes.
us about that too.
So it is a set of 12 short stories, and Seven City had just been doing well. It was before it had won an award. I had a lot of readers that liked it and liked the characters, and I even had some sort of dark horse favorites that I didn't think were going to be favorites. And
That's
people were like,
awesome.
oh, yeah, I always love when that happens. But I'm not prepared for it.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, I'd love to see more of these characters. And I got enough little ideas percolating in my head, and enough like, oh, I would love to see more of this character from different people who were asking for sequels and stuff like that. Where I said, oh, hey, I could actually probably put together a collection. And so I did that. And it was fun because short stories used to be a really tough medium for me.
Right. Yeah. And
And
then, but you're able to do 12 of them and get them together. So what's the title of that collection?
it's called The Rivers Lead Home and Other Stories.
Oh, that sounds so good. All right. So I need to know like what you're working on now or what we can look forward to from you next.
Yes. So I have a King Arthur retelling Western fantasy trilogy. And the first two books are out. The series is called The Knights of Tin and Lead. And the third book, the finale book, is coming out March 29th.
Ooh, like right away. So
Very
what's the
soon.
title of that one?
It's called In the Glorious Fields.
Okay.
The
These
third
sound
book
so
is.
good. I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna get that one, and then I'm gonna get that one, and then I'm gonna get that one. That is awesome. So those are the ones that are coming out. But I mean, I'm hearing that you're just like writing one thing after another. So I know you have more in the works. So can you give us like any hints of those books?
Um, it's
You're
still
like, which one?
pretty.
I know you're like, which one should I talk about? It's probably the question, right?
Yes. I I have a book that's I'm still in the middle of, but it's slated for a December release of this
Okay.
year.
Oh.
And it is kind of fantasy illusionist 20s, you know, jazz era fantasy. And it's like very political thriller. It's a little bit shorter.
Uh-huh.
It's going to have a much more like hopeful and dramatic Great Gatsby vibe.
Oh, that is so cool. Okay. How do you get your ideas? Because it's like the stuff that you're touching on, I'm like, that sounds really cool. And that sounds really cool. So, I mean, you probably have more ideas than you could ever sit down and write. But like, what are the ones that really will like rise to the surface that you're like, okay, I need to write this one?
I feel like once a character and a setting together has hooked me, I'm about done.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes I'll have an idea, like I've got a book set in the 1930s, and it's all like fairy and Wales, and there's this Welsh bakery, and like with something like that, it was the atmosphere. It's like
Mm.
50s and 1930s Wales. You got the rain, you have, you know, baked goods and cold days, and then there's the guy who runs the bakery is a very mysterious fellow. He's actually like from India, not mystical at all, but you know, it's just like it was such an anomaly. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what is the Indian guy doing in a really small town bakery in Wales? And that's like those moments are where I'm hooked and where it's kind of over. I
That's so
have to write
cool.
it.
Yeah. So you mentioned like you would always tell like stories to your younger siblings, and then you mentioned like they're always grabbing the book. So, do you test things out on them, or do they want to know what you're writing,
I
or?
do. I do. I actually have a brilliant proofreading system. I have a couple like serious proofreaders that I send it to,
Uh-huh.
but I'll buy a jar of jelly beans and
I'm loving this so much. Okay, good.
and I print the manuscript out, like 4 copies or something, and I pass it out and I say, anyone who thinks they found a typo, as long as it just looks weird and you're wondering about it, mark it for me and you get a jelly bean. And so they'll just comb that thing through, and I mean, even if it's not a typo, they'll find typos, but even if it's not one, anything that a reader will be like, oh, was that right, I
Mm.
can get a look at. So
Okay, that is so
for sure.
smart. I still have 5 kids in the house. I'm trying to figure this out. Like, I might take your jelly bean system because my kids are like, I don't want to read mom's books. And people will go to book signings and we go to conventions and like, do you read your mom's books? And they're like, no. And okay, so jelly beans might be the thing that can get them to read mom's books.
It's very
So
motivating.
I love that so much. Okay, so you talked about like reading, what'd you say, like between 50 and 70 books a year. I would just love to hear like some of your favorites, specifically in like the Christian fiction genre.
Let me think. There is an awesome author that I've read a few of her books, and her name is escaping me, actually, which
Look it
is
up. Look it up real quick.
awful. I am
Well,
looking it up.
you mentioned Nadine.
Oh yes, I did.
So,
I love Nadine's. She has such lovely themes. I feel like her concepts are really cool, but then she leads you along and she always brings you to a resolution that I really do agree with.
yeah.
And man, the minute you ask me, off it goes.
Well, yeah.
I will say that I love some of the older, almost like before there was a young adult genre, young adult books. Rosemary Sutcliffe. I love Tolkien. Marguerite Henry, Armstrong Sperry, Eloise Jarvis McGraw. I feel like those authors were really what influenced my writing a lot.
And I think books that are published like in the like late 30s or like 40s are some of the best. I mean, that's when the Little House on the Prairie books were published, and then the authors that you're talking about, some of them were published in that time. And I just think it was a really sweet time for literature. And I don't know who the editors were, but they got some really good stuff. And that is one of my best like time periods. I love like the Betsy Tacy books, and
yes,
all of those are just the sweetest. Just the characters and the people. And I mean, I don't think at the time they were labeled Christian fiction, but there's definitely themes of faith and of truth and good virtues that, and those are my favorite to read out loud to my kids. And my youngest now is 11, it's a boy, but I'm reading the Little House on the Prairie series out loud to him, and he has not. He has not argued about it yet. So at bedtime, we're reading that. And then even the Betsy Tacy books, I've read those out loud to my kids like twice. And anytime someone says Joe, my little guy goes, Joe Willard, because that's the main guy in the book. And so it's so funny that, my kids might not know like some of the modern day writers, but they're very familiar with those stories. And so I totally agree with it, what your mom did. And I think the vocabulary is more sophisticated. The storylines are more sophisticated. Everything's not resolved in 50 pages. You have to carry over on multiple books. And so I think, really going back to that time period, it may not be labeled Christian fiction, but the themes and the worldviews are very much what someone would align today with being Christian fiction.
Indeed. I found the name. It's Linda Nichols.
Oh, very cool. Awesome. So what are some of her titles? Because I've heard of her. I'm trying to think if I've read any of hers.
She wrote a really fun rom-com called Handyman. She wrote a book called At the Scent of Water that I really liked. Not a Sparrow Falls.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Eden, If I Gained the World.
Yeah, okay, so that sounds really familiar. Very cool. All right, so we've talked about this book, and we've talked about the books that you're working on. Are you going to be going back to a Realm Makers conference soon?
I am, yes. I have plans to be at the Atlantic City Realm Makers this year.
We are too. So we'll have to say
Hooray!
hi. Okay, another fun thing about Realm Makers is, so if those aren't familiar with Realm Makers is how what's their slogan? So basically it's the Christian world of sci-fi, fantasy, otherworldly, so any
Mhm.
otherworldly thing. But they are such that they're the neatest group of people that support. And you talked about like some of your friends were, you're both like competing, but it's not really competing because everyone
Mhm.
there is like cheering each other on and supporting each other. It's super fun to like walk around and hear the conversations, and people are helping each other plots. And someone's talking about the troll that they're riding, the other person is talking about the saber in outer space that this guy's fighting with, and it's just like it's such a fun world to be with it. We're going to be back there too, so we'll have to do that. But the banquet, which is always on Friday night, also is costumes. So do you have a costume planned for this year?
I have some ideas. I have some friends who are going as Disney princesses,
Mm-hmm.
and I might join them. But my sister, who does not write, she comes and helps me run my table and
Oh,
work.
okay.
She's very much like a sidekick, um, sort of sister. We loved a road trip, so she'll be there, and she keeps having different ideas of what we could do. And so I'll probably, because she's much more into the cosplay side, um, I'll bend with whatever she wants to do.
Yeah, that's so fun. So last year we did not dress up. It was our first year at Realm Makers. I'm not like I've been to tons of writers conferences and we've done banquet night, and I've been to even some where people have dressed up, but it's been like such a small fraction of the people, like it's just a regular writers conference. Um I think me and my husband and my son, who's 27, were like maybe 3 out of the 10 people who were not dressed up. So I'm like, next year. And so I already got pieces of my steampunk outfit that I will be wearing
Ooh.
there. Yes, I will be posting photos. I might have to do a Facebook Live video of me with my steampunk. I have my jacket. I'm super excited about it. It's really cute. So then now I'm like, what can I write in this genre? I really like steampunk. So anyway, that's
Steampunk is
super.
such a cool genre.
It is such a cool genre. It's yeah, and yeah, it's fun. Well, I am so excited that you were here. So, really quick, maybe give us some more. Repeat your titles of some of your books. I know we talked about a lot, but of course, Seventh City, Gotta Get It, award-winning book. Give us those titles again, and then where can people go online to just connect with you and find out more information about your books?
Awesome. Yeah, so we have the Portal Fantasy, my debut novel, which is Crowning Heaven. And then we have the Atlantis story, The Last Atlantean. And we have the companion short stories, which are The Rivers Lead Home and Other
Mm-hmm.
Stories. And then we have the Knights of Tin and Lead series, which is These War-Torn Hands, The Beautiful Ones, and In the Glorious Fields, which you can pre-order.
Okay.
And yeah, if you want to connect, I am mostly on Instagram
Okay.
at Songs of Heroes. But you can also find me on Facebook, Emily Hayse. I've got an author page. Twitter, I repost very little, but I am on there. Like if you message me, I'll see it.
Yeah. Very good. And you have the best titles. Like your book title names are so
Thank you.
good. I'm like, I love them. But Emily, thank you for being here. I'm super excited about finishing this. It's gonna be going into my backpack. So when I'm out with the kids doing stuff, I'm gonna keep reading. But thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.